Good afternoon, everyone. We will plan on starting in about the next minute or so as we have folks continuing to trickle in. We'll remain muted until then, and then we'll get started. Excellent. Looks like we've got a very full house today for this webinar focused on Blue UAS and our call for recognized assessors as part of a multi-stakeholder partnership in support of the evolution of DIU's Blue UAS effort. Good afternoon to everyone who's joined us. Really appreciate you taking the time to learn a bit more about this effort and learn a bit more about how DIU is thinking about building a multi-stakeholder partnership related to Blue UAS recognized assessors. I'm joined today by Tim Radigan, who is a product manager, part of the commercial operations team at DIU, who's leading the overall project management for the Recognized Assessor multi-stakeholder partnership. I'm also joined by Shane Goodwin, who supports the autonomy portfolio, as well as myself, also supporting the autonomy portfolio in our commercial engagement efforts. Today, we have about 45 minutes with the group. The overall run of show will include us stepping through a few slides that hopefully give you a little bit more clarity and reemphasize some of the points that are most germane to this effort to build out a partnership of recognized assessors for Blue UAS. And then we'll certainly leave time towards the end to address questions that folks on the webinar may have. You will see in your Zoom panel that there is a Q&A window. Please submit your questions via the Q&A window, and we'll work through those during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. A few other points I'll cover before I hand it over to Tim. I want to emphasize that today's call, and we want to use the time in this webinar, today's call is focused on the recognized assessor call that is tied to establishing the multi-stakeholder partnership. We certainly understand that folks on this particular webinar may have questions related to Project GI, which we will touch on, which is another related effort. But there will be a separate webinar for Project GI that you can register for on the Project GI page where that effort has been announced. I encourage you to do so if that's an effort that you are interested in and would like to participate in. I'd also like to note that participants on the call may also have specific questions related to the executive order that was released on Friday and how it touches Blue UAS. What I'll say is that's not an area that we're going to deep dive into today. DIU is moving out on the activities that we've already announced that ultimately are supportive of unleashing drone dominance for the US, to include updates to Blue UAS that were announced as part of the May 16 announcement with respect to the evolution of Blue UAS. Part of that is this recognized assessor multi-stakeholder partnership. And we're going to continue to coordinate with the department and all relevant stakeholders as it relates to the executive order. And finally, what I'll say is this session is being recorded. So if you have colleagues or other partners who have not had the opportunity to hear or to join or hear a bit more about what we're talking about today, this recording will be available and will be shared on the page that announces the call for Blue UAS recognized assessors. So without further ado, and now that we've covered the majority of the housekeeping items, I'll hand over the presentation to my colleague, Tim Radigan, who will step us through what the agenda is and cover some upfront topics, and then we'll loop back and double click into Blue UAS specifically, as well as the multi-stakeholder partnership we're seeking to establish. Over to you, Tim.
Awesome, Orlando. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Very aware that everybody's time is is valuable. So we'll move through this fairly expeditiously. The agenda today, we'll do a quick introduction to DIU for those of you that might not be familiar with the work that the Defense Innovation Unit does. Move into the particulars of Blue UAS, both the program and how it originally evolved and where it's going. As Orlando alluded to, both this multi-stakeholder partnership opportunity and alongside Project GI, a kind of a two-pillar approach. We'll go into the particulars of how to apply for this particular recognized assessor solicitation and how that's germane to the MSP or the multi-stakeholder partnership. And then we'll leave some time on the backside for a targeted Q&A. Next slide, please. Again, with the expectation that most of you, if not all of you, are at least familiar with DIU in some form or shape, we'll move through this fairly quickly. But broadly, the mission of the unit, which is 10 years old now, is to accelerate DoD's adoption of commercial technology at speed and scale, at the speed of need or relevance, in order to turn major conflict or to win a force to fight. We are trying to get commercial tech into the hands of the warfighter as quickly and expeditiously as possible. I recently joined DIU personally from 4 years on the commercial tech space, working in defense tech or venture-backed defense tech. So I've sat on the other side of the table, and I'm familiar, at least moderately familiar with what I'd like to see an organization like DIU trying to lead within DoD. And so far, I've seen that within the organization. Next slide. Again, I won't read through these, but these are the three pillars that drive what DIU does and how we do business on a day-to-day basis. Next slide. Someone had asked too in the Q&A if these slides would be available, and I think Orlando already spoke to the fact that we'll provide both a connection to the recording and some of these slides at people's request as well. These are the five pillars that we work through at DIU. Again, happy to speak to these in more detail in the Q&A if there are things that are germane to the other work that the unit does, both from a prototyping and ultimately a procurement standpoint. But we wanted to spend the lion's share of the time today focused on this particular solicitation. Next slide. Awesome. And I think it's going back over to you, Orlando, for the evolution of Blue UAS. Orlando, are you good? Can you hear us?
Yeah, apologies for the technical difficulties there, but I think we're finally back in action here.
We got you back. Yes. Thank you.
So switching gears, and thank you, Tim, for the overarching overview of DIU's efforts and how this ultimately nests into the broader picture for the team. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Blue UAS, why we're moving towards an evolution, and then how the multi-stakeholder partnership for recognized assessors fits into the overall picture here. Um, DIU founded Blue UAS with the intent of accelerating the adoption of commercial off-the-shelf drone platforms for the DoD by providing a mechanism to establish how those platforms were in compliance with the law and how those platforms over the long term were cyber secure and could be adopted or purchased off the shelf by the DoD. But recognizing that not only has the industry evolved considerably, but also the needs of warfighters have continued to evolve over that time frame. And ultimately, that has led us to move towards an evolution of Blue UAS that's focused primarily on two pillars, which one is tied to the core compliance mission that has existed within Blue UAS for some time, but also moving towards a focus on a pillar related to scaling, which is very much intended to support the idea of ensuring that we're putting a higher volume, greater number of platforms in the hands of warfighters with operationally relevant capabilities. Um, as I mentioned, today we're focusing on the recognized assessor infrastructure, which is focused on ultimately expanding the aperture in terms of the ability to assess platforms for NDAA compliance and add them to the Blue UAS cleared list using third-party organizations to support those assessments. If you're interested in Project GI, which was announced in conjunction with the multi-stakeholder partnership call, I'd encourage you to go on the DIU website and register for the webinar that is specifically focused on Project GI, which will touch on the topics of that particular solicitation, as well as the method for how to apply and some of the objectives tied to it. So painting the picture of where we were or where we are today and where we're going, I think is key for this specific discussion. Blue UAS today is primarily composed of two components: the Blue UAS cleared list, which is a list of NDAA compliant UAS that are authorized for DoD purchase and operation based on mission needs. Platforms on the Blue UAS cleared list today not only are established as NDAA compliant, but also have an authority to operate informed by cybersecurity assessments. And then on the component side, the Blue UAS framework lists NDAA compliant critical components, which provides UAS developers options to support building NDAA compliant UAS. In the evolved version of Blue UAS, there will be Blue UAS cleared list, which will remain. And that list will continue to be focused on NDA compliant or NDA compliant platforms that recognized assessors will help with the assessments of. The framework will continue as a list of NDA critical components. And the only kind of core addition to the overall Blue UAS initiative here is that Blue UAS Select will be the list of NDA compliant UAS that also have ATOs that are selected based on mission needs and performance. But the overall intent of establishing the recognized assessors via this partnership is to ensure that we can grow the cleared list to have the maximum number of NDA compliant platforms available for DoD purchase. With respect to what a multi-stakeholder partnership is and what we're specifically doing in this effort, a multi-stakeholder partnership is a relatively new authority that DIU has. What it allows DIU to do is to bring together a collaborative alliance of two or more entities that can be focused on commercializing something that is inherently governmental. This, in many ways, this authority is quite well tailored for establishing what we are seeking to do. In the big picture, what DIU is seeking to do is to develop a network of recognized assessors that are third-party entities that can conduct the needed assessments to establish NDAA compliance of drone platforms and components, and then ultimately route those assessments back to DIU and the government to be able to make the determination and ultimately the addition of platforms to the Blue UAS list, to the Blue UAS cleared list. A few of the nuances here that I want to make sure are fully covered and not lost in what is a quite text-dense slide is that the intended relationship that we foresee as we build a multi-stakeholder partnership is that the individual drone component or drone platform developer will have the opportunity to engage directly with a recognized assessor and fund their own assessments with the intent of now having a far greater top of funnel of assessments that can be generated relative to what currently exists under the existing infrastructure. We have not yet pushed out a specific number with respect to the initial cohort of recognized assessors within the partnership. But the overarching North Star as we think about building this partnership of recognized assessors is to ensure that there is sufficient volume available of and bandwidth available amongst the recognized assessors to support the demand that drone developers will have for building platforms or for having platforms assessed that as NDAA compliant. And understanding that that will be a learning process over time as we understand how to ensure what the appropriate match of supply and demand is for the recognized assessor partnership. But our intent is to ensure that we're building that cohort to the degree that there is not significant bottlenecks in the process for companies to have assessments of their platforms or their components. The focus is very much on the assessment part. Recognized assessors will be responsible for making compliance assessments on all relevant components under existing law and policy. Verification of all ownership interest stakes as required under existing law and policy, determine eligibility for platforms to be added to the Blue UAS list, reviewing supply chain provenance and being able to identify country of origin for specific components, relevant software, firmware, hardware artifacts to make sure that there's compliance with existing law and policy across the board. And then ultimately providing standardized assessments and reporting them to the government via DIU for certification consideration. It is very important to us that recognized assessors ensure they're operating with significant independence, integrity, and technical rigor. While the intent of DIU is not to while the intent of DIU is to ensure that we are expanding the availability of additions to the cleared UAS list to the maximum extent practicable, that is not at the risk of or at the expense of ensuring a very, very high standard of rigor in the assessments that are being done to ensure that platforms are compliant with the law. We plan to evaluate the submissions that come in for the multi-stakeholder partnership, and there's a range of considerations that will go into those assessments. This list is not meant to be exhaustive by any means. However, it's meant to highlight for the teams that may be submitting how DIU will be thinking about assessing those submissions and what are some of the core elements that will go into the assessment of the submissions that are made for the multi-stakeholder partnership. Among them, as you might imagine, the technical qualifications and the wherewithal to do the work that is being requested, overall team composition, and the teammates and their talent available for making these assessments a reality. The cost piece I'll touch on briefly. Ultimately, we recognize that for a relatively small company or a company that's early in its life cycle, we do not want this process to become a fundamentally gating factor in terms of the resources that they need to expend to do it. Part of the thinking behind building a multi-stakeholder partnership is that by building a greater set of options to seek NDAA compliance assessments, market dynamics will ultimately have an impact in being able to bring down the overall cost of having these assessments be completed. I touched on organizational independence. Already demonstrated experience in relevant arenas is useful. A sense of the ability to scale as part of the company's trajectory as more and more demand for services expands. And finally, this notion of adherence to government standards, reporting format, and audit oversight. And I'll take a few minutes to touch on that specifically. As part of establishing the network of recognized assessors, a very important consideration is that there will be a standardization supported by, in concert with the government relevant stakeholders across the services and led by DIU to quite clearly establish what the standard of assessment looks like for all recognized assessors. And maintaining that consistency will be a critical portion of ensuring a rapid turnaround of not only evaluation of the assessments that do come in of specific platforms or components, but also ensuring that as quickly as possible, DIU can process assessments and add platforms or components to the cleared list or framework. And that will be, we fully expect that the standardization of that reporting will be a collaborative effort once we have selected the initial cohort of recognized assessors, and we work to onboard those recognized assessors to ensure they're fully equipped to do the work that is needed to meet the objectives of this overall effort. Some final notes that are more the brass tacks of how this will flow. Submissions will be made via the DIU website. If today you Google Blue UAS recognized assessors, you'll be directed to the announcement page, which links to the submission page. The deadline for submissions is the 16th of June at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. What we encourage those that are interested to do is submit a maximum 15-page presentation or 5-page white paper. It's ultimately up to you, that lays out the capabilities of the organization and is responsive to the overall type of work that is being laid out as part of the responsibility of recognized assessors, but also there is some guidance on the submission page with respect to what we expect strong submissions might contain. And I encourage you to review that guidance because I think it can be quite helpful in helping you build your submission for becoming a recognized assessor. There will be additional data calls and evaluation rounds. As I mentioned, there will be the establishment of the initial cohort and then a significant onboarding timeframe in order to ensure high level of standardization, high level of rigor, and the ability to very, very rapidly start the process of DIU intaking reporting from recognized assessors and adding companies to the Blue UAS cleared list. But you can expect progress updates over time, but we do ask your patience as we go through this process, as it represents a significant departure from the current process, but one that we ultimately think drives benefit not only to the warfighter, but also to. As I mentioned earlier, the initial cohort will be a limited cohort to ensure that we do this right with the right partners. However, the intent is to continue to grow that pool of recognized assessors to meet rising demand for the capabilities of NDAA compliance assessments. And mentioned the last point already again, but I'll foot stomp it a bit. I would encourage you to review the announcement where we made the call for recognized assessors to ensure that you can see some of the guidance with respect to what we would expect to see in strong submissions that appropriately highlight the capabilities that link to the objectives of this effort. That closes out the formal portion. I think at this point, I'll hand it over to Tim. I know we've seen quite a few questions come in, and we'll do our very best to address as many of them as we can. If we didn't get to a specific question, or if a question that you have is not necessarily germane to the specifics of the multi-stakeholder partnership and the process for submission, I encourage you to route those appropriately to various contact links that DIU has. Or if on the tail end of this webinar, you have another question with respect to the multi-stakeholder partnership to recognize assessors, you can find a link to contact the appropriate team on the DIU website, specifically on the submission page for this partnership. So with that, hand it over to Tim, and we'll dive into some questions. Certainly appreciate the time.
Yeah, Orlando, thank you for the thorough overview. Some great questions coming in from the group. Some of these I'll attempt to read out each of these as we go through them, and we'll hand them off to my colleagues based on the technical level of each question. There are a few in here about the ability of non-industry or other governmental organizations and their ability to participate. So both one with regard to FFRDCs, will they be eligible to serve as assessors, i.e. DOE, DoD labs, etc., and are potential recognized assessors limited to private industry, or can it be done with other government organizations? I know that's been discussed. Orlando, I'll hand that one off to you just for some further clarity.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. The multi-stakeholder partnership certainly enables DIU to partner with non-DoD but other governmental entities to achieve the overall objectives that the partnership is focused on. And if you look at the actual statute that was contained in the slides with respect to how this partnership or how a partnership can be built, it's quite flexible in terms of the entities that can be included. For the purpose of this specific partnership, one of the keys that we want to ensure is available, irrespective of whether it's a commercial entity, a nonprofit entity, a governmental entity that is applying to be part of the multi-stakeholder partnership, is that there's a clear wherewithal to be able to directly engage with industry to conduct these assessments without necessarily needing another government intermediary or there being a significant outsourcing of the capability. So to put a little bit of a sharper point on it, we would certainly welcome submissions from government partners that have an appetite for and the ability to potentially create a pipeline by which companies can directly engage with them and fund their assessments. I think we certainly have an openness to that. However, the key piece that we'll lay in here is that this particular effort, as the way that Blue UAS has been since its inception, is a DoD focused effort. And ultimately, the DoD in partnership with DIU will be setting out the standards, the playbook, and ultimately what that reporting must look like for us to be able to be the recipient of it and ultimately make determinations of adding companies to the cleared list. So if a government organization feels that there is a play and an angle and an opportunity here and wants to support that particular objective, I think we'd welcome seeing a submission, but just want to make sure that we're quite clear about where the objectives are for this effort. And Shane, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add there in terms of that.
Nothing specific. There were a few questions also related to that for like expected costs and that sort of thing. So as you said, the primary relationship that would be funded here would be from the commercial entities looking to go through this process with the recognized assessor directly. There wouldn't be funding flowing back and forth between DIU and those entities, right, to obtain the reports or anything like that. The relationship for funding would be between the commercial entity and the recognized assessor.
That's great clarification.
I think a number of questions here in the queue of which related to both funding of potential assessors and those companies ultimately needing, those UAS providers ultimately needing an assessment, and whether DIU anticipates any funding being available to those companies that might not be able to bear that cost burden. Orlando, any amplifying info there?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to address that one. In the initial cohort of recognized assessors, there's not currently a specific sort of funding mechanism that has been laid out for that establishment. This initial call is very, very much focused on partnering with entities that feel they're well positioned to do this type of work and would like to have a commercial opportunity related to establishing NDAA compliance for drone platforms and components. and partnering with DIU and the broader DoD to stand up that capability, thus expanding our ability to add platforms to the Blue UAS cleared list. What I will say, and this is, and I want to be very, very clear, this is not kind of a specific commitment to future state. There is a wherewithal within a multi-stakeholder partnership and the authority that establishes it to enable DIU to fund the partnership. Um, that is, as we continue to evolve this effort, that is a lever that we know we have available to us, and will, as this develops and we understand where the market demand is, and where potentially some of the bottlenecks in moving through this process exist. Uh, that is a lever that will be available for us to be able to uh, more cleanly and more effectively drive towards the overall objective. But in the first iteration here, just want to be very, very clear, this is not an intent to establish a funded relationship with the recognized assessors, but rather to partner with them for the commercialization of the process to build the appropriate assessments that support DIU's cleared list decisions.
Thank you, Orlando. Question here, which I don't think we spoke directly to, but a great question. How is DIU thinking about partnerships between assessors for responding to this particular solicitation? Does DIU want each third-party assessor response to offer an all-in-one solution, or does DIU anticipate creating that all-in-one solution during the down select process based on the competitive advantage of each selected vendor's capabilities?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here, and Shane, I'd love for you to give some augmenting comments. Um, I think it's an excellent question. We certainly realize that the holistic list of what goes into supporting one of these assessments may not necessarily fit, or the universe of organizations that may have the holistic capabilities to provide that full assessment may be somewhat limited. If you feel that you have a differentiated capability to provide a segment of that, I wouldn't necessarily self-select out from submitting to the multi-stakeholder partnership, as the flexibility of the specific authority will allow us to build this in a manner that most effectively leads us to the overall objective, right? And I continue to say that because I really want to make sure that everything that we mention here is tied to why are we doing this, and what are we pushing towards. So I think there is a world, and I want to ensure that it's clear where there would be abilities or opportunities to potentially team or connect strong recognized assessor candidates to deliver the overarching solution. And we certainly want to be made aware of what capabilities are out there that could potentially lead us to a better answer. But that's not something we've made fundamental determination of upfront in terms of saying, hey, we are going to have just 5 specific vendors that have holistic capabilities that can do the entire assessment alone, and that's the only way we're going to structure it. Ultimately, we have some flexibility in the final structure, and therefore, if you have a capability that's standalone that maybe addresses one segment of the effort, I would encourage you to submit your capabilities to the partnership. Shane, anything you would add there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions I've been reading through, kind of about what's entailed with an assessment and what the output products will look like. And while we're still nailing down the specifics to the assessment playbook, I can give a little bit of insight into what those primary roles or tasks would be. So there's company analysis. So you'd be looking at ownership and influence structure related to the company that's going through the process to ensure that they're compliant with any laws, regulations that may prohibit the US DoD from acquiring or doing business with their company or buying their products. The second part is the supply chain analysis, and this all revolves around what is defined as a critical electronic component under current law. And so this isn't just looking at a bill of materials, though that is involved. It is actually a physical hands-on teardown of the platform or component, taking photographs, doing research, everything that would be required in order to suss out, any potential issues there that would make critical components illegal. And then the third main area is the cyber assessment, and that's penetration testing, essentially like adversarial style hacking of the system, looking for potential attack vectors and that sort of thing. And the other aspect of that is compliance checks related to specific language in the NDAA and under other federal policy on protecting information that's on or processed by DoD information systems. So there's a subset of essentially RMF controls that will need to be evaluated as part of this assessment. There's the pen test report for vulnerabilities, and then there's the company analysis and supply chain analysis of all of the components. So going back to what Orlando was talking about in response to some of the questions that came in, those three different categories, if you just specialize in one particular area of that, most definitely you could still be part of the partnership potentially, and we can Jenga solutions to this problem together. Back to you, Orlando.
Tim, is there next question in the queue you'd like to tackle?
Yeah, of course. Just a few more here that a number related to, and maybe you could speak to this, Orlando and or Shane, about how DIU anticipates handling potential conflicts of interest with regard to the both third-party assessors. In some cases, one question specifically asked, would UAS vendors or providers be able to serve as simultaneously as assessors? And had we considered that?
Yeah, I'll tackle that one. Shane, feel free to add on. It's a reason why we've explicitly mentioned organizational independence being a significant component of how we're thinking about building this partnership appropriately. We have significantly prioritized the idea of ensuring that to the maximum extent possible, recognized assessors are free and independent, and there are not specific conflicts of interest that would enable or would not enable them to independently conduct assessments in support of this effort. So that is a significant consideration as we look at submissions that are made to be able to ensure that what we ultimately build in the initial cohort and beyond is quite independent and maintaining that significantly high standard of assessment that we seek. Shannon, anything to add?
I'd just say that's not something we're unfamiliar with at DIU. We work with a lot of companies on a regular basis, and obviously disclosing any conflicts of interest is part of our normal process. So I don't anticipate an issue there.
Yeah, and we've got time, I think, for one or two more questions here as we wrap up, and I think we've hit the lion's share of those that were submitted. So again, thank you to the large group of folks that joined us today and submitted a number of these questions, clarifying questions. This has certainly been touched on, Orlando, but maybe worth revisiting, before we wrap up. A question specific to a list of specifications that recognized assessors would use to conduct assessments, and if DIU was building that out, would we release that both to the RA perspectives and to the UAS community writ large, so that drone companies knew what to expect?
I'll let Shane do the kind of lion's share of discussing this, but I think the short answer is yes, as part of the onboarding and building out the initial cohort of recognized assessors. A critical piece of that onboarding is sharing of standards, reporting criteria, procedures for ongoing assessments to ensure that the standard remains high. And then similarly, it is our intent to also more wide in a more widely available manner for the companies that are ultimately seeking to be assessed or their platforms to be assessed, to have a set of standards that they can understand prior to embarking on that journey. But Shane, I'm sure, can give more detail there.
Yeah, I mean, that essentially boils down to two different documents that will both be published. The playbook, which will help guide our assessors to know how to execute an engagement on one of these platforms or components, and then the standard that the developer of that platform knew to design to, so that they can have a secure platform without a lot of go backs and things that they have to fix when they go through the assessment. So we will be working with the recognized assessors to finalize the playbook and figure out what makes sense and how best to execute on it. We're not going to do this in a vacuum. There will be a continuous evolution of this as well.
Thank you, guys. Maybe just one last question here, and again, a point of clarification, as I know Orlando, you spoke to this earlier, and it's something that's certainly top of mind for the team here. Does DIU anticipate current cleared list companies needing to be assessed further? And if so, in what fashion?
So all current Blue UAS platforms companies go through recurring reassessments. And that is something that will continue to have to occur. It's not a one and done type situation. Things change over time, attack vectors change over time, vulnerabilities, etc. So it is expected that there will be recurring reassessments necessary. And we're still working out the mechanics and timing of that. But yes.
So we're coming up on 45 minutes, folks. Orlando, Shane, thank you both as the the technical expertise here for leaning in, especially with the question and answers here from the larger group. What I would offer, just to those of you still on the call, please do feel free to forward additional questions if you have them, or as the process continues forward, to blueuasra@diu.mil. That's an email address that you should see on both the online solicitation and on the web instance on our DIU website. But again, that's blueuasra@diu.mil. And there's a number of us that will be able to field those questions as they come in if you weren't able to get something in today. Orlando, any last parting thoughts?
Yeah, just finally as a closing thought, I know we had many questions come in through the Q&A. We sought to kind of group them together and answer them to the maximum extent that we could. However, understand that maybe your specific question did not necessarily get answered. So what we will do as a team here is make sure that we synthesize amongst the questions that have been asked, and to those that are most generally applicable, we can document answers to those questions and then post them as part of a Q&A within the call for recognized assessors, just to make sure that if you have a question that was broadly applicable to many of the folks who might be interested in becoming a recognized assessor, that we clarify that further. But also another avenue, as Tim mentioned, is you can submit questions to that email address, and again, those that are generally applicable may be added as part of a Q&A that's posted on the site. So with that, certainly appreciate the time greatly, and all the engagement and enthusiasm to be part of this effort. It's incredibly heartening to see the response we've had so far, and we look forward to collaborating to build this out and ideally drive benefit not only to the industry, but most importantly to warfighters.
Thanks, everyone.